Hey guys, all right, I'm going to read the most important sections of the Jeffers Petroglyphs website that you're investigating to you. If you don't want me to read to you, that's okay. You don't have to listen to this video. You can read on your own. I'm just providing this to anyone that would rather have it read to them. So I went to the main website. You're going to be skimming over this section on your own. These are the different areas I want you to look at. I'm going to read the rock and archaeology. This section about the people, I'd like you to take a look at it and skim over it. And the prairie, same thing. Take a look at it, skim through it for some good information. But these two sections I want you to pay the most attention to. So let's read the rock first. The rock. More than 7,000 years of history are preserved on this outcropping of Sioux quartzite, home to roughly 5,000 rock carvings made by the ancestors of today's Native Americans. Petroglyphs are images carved on a rock face. The word comes from the Greek petra, meaning stone, and glyph, meaning carving. Petroglyphs are found worldwide, but the petroglyphs at Jeffers make up one of the oldest continuously used sacred sites in the world. These petroglyphs are part of the Minnesota Historical Society's archaeology collection. You can watch this video on your own too if you'd like. The carvings. The site preserves more than 5,000 Native American images carved into solid, horizontal, irregular shaped Sioux quartzite outcrops. Among the earliest carvings found here are images of bisons, atlatls, or throwing sticks. Atlatls are darts, and darts were used to hunt bison before the bow and arrow were developed 1,200 years ago. The glyphs serve many functions, including recording important events and stories and depicting sacred ceremonies. These symbols, along with other images carved on the rock, such as thunderbirds and turtles, remain important in Native American culture. Mysteries remain about what each glyph represents and about those who left them. The most common archaeological technique of dating the glyphs is identifying the items depicted, then relating them to peoples of a particular time period. By this technique, they appear to range from 5000 BCE to 1750 CE. It is interesting to note that the stones do not record bows and arrows. Also missing are glyphs representing horses, indicating that the site was no longer used by the late 1700s, although rock art from later times is prevalent. The images of the thunder being, or thunderbird, is relatively rare, one at the Jeffers site, appearing only 3 times. The multi-jointed wings in this glyph correspond to ethnographic descriptions from Dakota people records during the late 19th century. Horned figures have frequently been interpreted by rock art researchers as representations of shamans. However, warrior societies among various regional tribe cultures were also known to wear such headdresses. The glyph, thought to represent a turtle, an animal sacred to many Native American groups, may reflect a relationship to the underworld. Its representation here may indicate a connection between the rock outcrop and the below-surface world. The most recent Native American carving was made around the 1760s. From 1875 to 1968, European settlers and descendants added their names. The arrival of Europeans on the continent eroded traditional Native American culture, including insight into the sacred that had been passed on for thousands of years. Constructing the meaning and significance of the petroglyphs and surfacing their stories has been a labor of patience, discovery, and dedication led by a team of archaeologists and Native American elders. By studying the carvings, we can learn much about the culture and society of these ancient peoples. For example, researchers have learned that generations of Native American ancestors who gathered at the Red Rock for nearly 7,000 years had an advanced understanding of mathematics, geometry, astronomy, and medicine. Today, these images are understood and valued as spiritual or religious expression of the totality of the human condition. They have social and religious value to their creators and therefore become a part of the values of societies in general. These images have historic value because they provide direct evidence of cultural development in that they are a product of different traditions and spiritual achievements of the past. A sacred place. Around the world, certain landscapes and geological formations have special qualities that make them stand out from their surroundings. And for many cultures, such places have deep spiritual significance. To Native Americans, rock formations emerging from the earth provide a link between the physical and spiritual worlds. Such places are chosen to record visions, events, stories, or maps. Jeffers Petroglyphs is a special place. To Native Americans who reside in and around the state, it is a very spiritual place, one where Grandmother Earth speaks of the past, present, and future. To descendants of those who left these marks, this is a place of worship, a prayer place, likened to other places of worship such as a church, synagogue, or mosque. The earliest carvings at Jeffers petroglyphs were created as long as 7,000 years ago. The most recent were made about 250 years ago. This long time span makes Jeffers one of the oldest continuously used sacred sites in the world, if not the oldest. Geography and geology. Buried for millennia, the stone preserves evidence of ancient watercourses in the rippled surfaces of sand that were slowly solidified by heat and pressure. Gradually thrust to the surface and rough polished by glacial ice, a canvas was created that became a medium for the signs and symbols of ancient Native Americans. The pink rock face at Jeffers covers an area 50 yards wide and 300 yards long. It is part of a 23-mile ridge that extends across Cottonwood County. Called Red Rock Ridge, it is a series of quartzite outcroppings that intersects the southeastern edge of what French explorers called the Côte des Prairies. The Côte means hill, extends from Rutland, North Dakota to Jackson, Minnesota. The Red Rock Ridge is about 50 yards wide and up to 50 feet higher than nearby fields. The rock at Jeffers is also called Sioux quartzite. Its color varies from white to red to lavender brown or reddish purple due to the iron oxide film surrounding grains of quartz sand. The rock is part of the quartzite deposit found near the western border of Minnesota at Pipestone National Monument. The quartzite at Jeffers is one of the oldest bedrock formations in Minnesota. Deposited as sand more than 1.6 billion years ago, it is metamorphic rock, meaning it was formed by enormous heat and pressure from deep in the earth. The outcropping was exposed by the wearing action of time. Now let's go to the archaeologist section. So I'm going to go back up to learn and go to archaeology. Archaeology. Petroglyph and pictograph sites have been recorded all over the world, but the North American continent is home to one of the most diverse and culturally significant bodies of painting and engravings to be found anywhere. There's a picture of the site. This is like tarp and sandbags to help protect it from the elements, meaning the wind, rain, hail, snow. The early archaeologist. Warren Upham, a geologist and librarian who traveled extensively through Minnesota in the 1880s, was the earliest American of European descent to document the existence of the site. Newton H. Winchell summarized his description in the first comprehensive geological survey of the state in 1884. Between 1880 and 1895, Theodore Hayes Lewis documented burial mounds and other aboriginal earthworks in Minnesota and Wisconsin. He combined the first known documentation of the individual carvings at Jeffers. For about 50 years after Lewis's visit, little scholarly interest was expressed in the petroglyphs, though graffiti from the era proves that local farmers and townspeople were aware of the site's existence. A rekindled interest. In 1941, Lloyd A. Wilford, a University of Minnesota archaeologist, visited the site, but his notes from the site reflect that he was more interested in glacial striations on the rock face than the petroglyphs. He did point out the extensive lichen growth on the rock outcrop, which also explains why he noted only several petroglyphs being visible. The cyclical growth of lichen most likely affected the petroglyphs' visibility at any given point in time, and may be one reason for the erratic documentation of the site. But Paul Clammer, a local photographer and member of the Minnesota Archaeological Society, also visited the site in 1941. Clammer took a series of black and white photographs of the carvings. Throughout the 1950s, local residents near Jeffers, including County Historical Society, urged the Minnesota Historical Society to purchase the petroglyph site for preservation and interpretation. In 1966, MNHS purchased 40 acres of land from the Warren Jeffers estate that included the main rock outcrop at the site, and the historic site was open to the public. A local resident, Florence Rofer, served as the custodian of the site, and a small structure was built as an interpretive center. During this period, the carvings were painted with a marine varnish to increase visibility for visitors. This practice continued until the early 1980s, and traces of the varnish can still be seen on some parts of the rock face today. Interpreting the carvings. In 1971, MNHS dispatched archaeologist Gordon A. Lothson to Jeffers with instructions to document as many carvings as possible. Lothson discovered there were many more carvings than previously estimated, and the project, originally planned for 2 weeks, extended into 2 months. 2 anthropology students and an artist assisted in the effort. They identified approximately 2,000 individual petroglyphs on a part of the rock face 50 yards wide and 300 yards long. The petroglyphs contain images of humans, animals, tools, and unidentifiable shapes carved by ancient Native Americans. The glyphs are not evenly distributed over the exposed surface and appear to reflect episodic use of the site over as long as period as 7,000 years. Lothson documented the carvings in 3 different formats: photographs, rubbings, and line drawings. In 1976, Lothson published his research and interpretation of the site. It was the first introduction the general public had to the site. In his publication, Lothson set forth his view that many of the almost 2,000 carvings he had documented were related to the performance of sacred ceremonies and the recording of important events among these ancient peoples. In 1999, MNHS secured state funding for a new research project led by Robert Klaus, head of archaeology department at the University of Minnesota. Klaus conducted a summer field school at Jeffers, where students worked on a new effort to document the carvings, influenced by contemporary rock art theory that rejected the practice of researchers interpreting the carvings when documenting. Klaus developed a new technique for recording carvings, which, he believed, would eliminate observer bias from the process. Students placed sheets of mylar on the rock face and, using colored markers, recorded not shapes, but individual peck marks. The Jeffers Conservation Project. Adjacent to this main rock outcrop was another wide, flat rock slab. This one was covered with lichen, an organism that is part algae and part fungus that anchors itself to the rock. Because of the lichen, researchers were uncertain whether there were additional engravings on that rock, and if there were, what they would show. Removing the lichen would have to be done carefully so as not to damage any potential petroglyph that lay beneath. In 2006, Tom Sanders, the site manager at Jeffers at that time, initiated a new conservation and documentation effort to address long-term conservation issues. He assembled an interdisciplinary team that included Native American elders, conservators, archaeologists, and MNHS staff. Several years of discussion, experimentation, and consultation resulted in the Jeffers Conservation Project. The project included a plan to naturally remove the lichen in a way that would have the smallest impact possible on the petroglyphs that might be underneath. The effort took more than 5 summer seasons and included covering the lichen with sun-blocking black plastic membranes to remove their source food via sunlight and remove dead lichen with careful and repetitive mopping. The effort paid off, with researchers uncovering around 3,000 additional petroglyphs on the site. This more than doubled the number of identified carvings at Jeffers Petroglyphs from 2,000 to 5,000. The new discoveries also provided evidence that generations of Native American ancestors who gathered at the Red Rock for nearly 7,000 years had advanced understanding of mathematics, geometry, astronomy, and medicine. Pretty crazy. Oh my gosh, it just gives me goosebumps. I just got goosebumps. All right, guys, keep looking at the site. Feel free to browse the other sections, the people and the prairie. Have fun.